Welcome to Better Than We Found It, the podcast for leaders driven to leave a positive mark through their leadership.
I hope that I will have created some ways in which the circumstances of your birth don't predict the opportunities you have in your life.
I'm Josh Huggins, your host and the founder of GS2 Partnership, a search firm committed to connecting visionaries dedicated to environmental and social betterment.
I have two young sons. I want to be able to tell them I did use the resources and expertise of a company to try to create more awareness about climate change.
In each episode, we delve into the minds of executive and future leaders. We discuss how sustainability guides responsible leadership, sparks change, and drives value.
The way of thinking I try and advocate is for us all to think about us having a collective problem to fix, which is climate, and that we need to rebuild our global economy.
We are GS2, and we are on a critical journey to connect to those who believe in leaving the world better than we found it.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Better Than We Found It. On today's show, I'm joined by the wonderful Elena Doms. Elena, for those of you who aren't prominent on LinkedIn, may not know, but she was the original poster for the What's New in Sustainability in 1 minute, which became a bit of an internet phenomenon for sustainability, particularly on LinkedIn over the past year or so. Since then, she has been part of the founding team of Earth Plus, an organisation that is set to revolutionise the way that soils are cleaned, but also technology to enable regenerative agriculture and the circular economy. In this conversation, though, we discuss her career transition from corporate roles and work in Mastercard through to now being a sustainability entrepreneur and how that journey was shaped, but also back to her early childhood growing up in the Arctic and what that meant for her and her view around nature and sustainability. So it's a fascinating discussion. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did, and let's dive right in. So Elena, welcome to Better Than We Found It.
Hi Josh, good to see you today.
Good to see you. I'm glad we made it with some IT updates and Google doing its thing, but we're here and we're talking, which is the main thing. So it's great to have you on board. I did do a little introduction before you joined just then, but I can certainly not do it justice. So would you mind just giving an overview of yourself and your business to the audience, please?
Yes, of course. So I was born and raised in the Arctic, so I come from the far north. That's one of the reasons why I'm very passionate about sustainability. And currently I'm CEO at Earth Plus, which is a nature tech startup devoted to a crazy big mission to create the next ocean cleanup, but for soils. And what we do is we restore or clean soils with the power of nature. And we use plants' biomass to make carbon negative construction materials, literally stocking CO2 in buildings. And this way, creating more money and resources to do regeneration of land around the world.
Excellent. Well, we're going to get into it in a lot more detail. But as you say, your story started in the Arctic, and I think the unique nature of that is something I really want to understand. I'm sure you've talked about it a few times, but could you just tell us a bit more about the experience of what it's like living there and how I suppose it shaped your passion for sustainability?
Well, I'll be honest with you, Josh. I thought that the experience of growing up in the Arctic is not very much different than anywhere else until I started telling people about my childhood. But maybe the best things I could do is pinpoint a bit of memories that I have as a kid. So what I remember is very, very cold winters and complete darkness in winter. And I was a little girl. My mom would, wrap me in layers and layers of clothes until I looked like a little cabbage. And then we'd go downstairs, in our apartment building with my dad. And before we'd go outside, he would rub my nose, rub my cheeks, and cover my face all until the eyes were the only thing that was visible in a warm scarf. And then he would pick me up, and I was really little. He would pick me up and carry me all the way in his arms until the kindergarten or until school, making jokes, singing. And the only thing we would see would be the lights reflecting off the snow, and I would hear, his footsteps crunching on the snow while we would walk. And I'm just really fond of that type of memory. And then the summers were complete opposite because it would be polar day the whole time. And when I was 3 years old, my parents bought a little piece of land to to embark on a crazy, risky journey of Arctic agriculture. And my dad built a little wooden house there, and we spent all our summers there, growing berries, growing vegetables, going to the boreal forest to gather mushrooms together, walking on swamps, and running around with the neighborhood kids until midnight, and then swimming in the ice-cold river. That's where I learned to swim. So that's kind of childhood that I had, and it had the same moments, I think, as everybody else does. Family love and friends and staying late and learning new things, but it also was kind of shaped by the weather, by the snow, by polar day, polar night, sometimes seeing seals on the river, like my dad meeting a bear in the forest. Those kind of things were a little bit unusual, but yeah, it was really fun.
And I suppose when you grow and learn in that environment, as you say, it's not unique because you're in it. But I suppose on the outside looking in, whilst there's elements that are similar, I suppose the environment you're in is so different to what it's like for many of us. So when did you start to understand that? How important nature was and how much a part it played in your life or the wider ecosystem?
To be honest, I think it wasn't like a on-the-spot realization, because I was a lot in nature when I was a kid, and I learned how to grow food together with my parents, but it's something that just came naturally and didn't think about it. And then when I was in university, I didn't know what to write my bachelor diploma about, and I started reading, and I started stumbling upon soils and growing food, industrial agriculture and chemicals, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Started diving into transnational corporations, soils, plastic, and like all kinds of things. And I remember there was a moment that was like, oh, bing, that's very interesting, I'd like to work on that. And then later on, in a few years, when I was already living in Belgium, it was actually the pandemic, my mom was telling me how the Arctic is changing abruptly. And in parallel, I was doing my degree in energy and climate, kind of learning everything about different ecosystems and what needs to be done, and noticing how drastic the change is in comparison to 30 years ago when I was a kid. And that's when it hit me, like how important the Arctic is, how important nature is in general. And yeah, that's when my transition, let's say, speeded up.
For sure. I suppose the key thing that I want to talk about today is this journey, because whilst your childhood was shaped around the environment and nature, your career path, admittedly more early on in your career, was probably more traditional in terms of sales and business development. So you mentioned uni there. Tell me a bit more about your kind of early roles in corporate society and what you were doing.
Well, actually, maybe let's start why I ended up in Belgium. In university back home, I was in a student organization called ISEC that focuses a lot on social impact and leadership development and international traineeships. And I was selected to be part of ISEC in Belgium. So I came here in Belgium, and 2 years I spent here in this amazing student organization, and in the last year being the president of ISEC in Belgium. And then I had some friends who were working at Mastercard, and at some point they were looking for a Russian speaker to work with Russian-speaking clients in different countries, and that was, the Baltics, the Stans, Ukraine, Russia, Armenia, Belarus. And that's how I ended up in a corporate career. I was looking for a job one day, and another day just happened. I think it was the easiest job search I ever had. After that, I didn't have it that easy. And I joined the team. I learned a lot about sales, and I wanted to learn about sales because I always considered it my weak point. And I was like, I need to kind of throw myself into that. And for 11 years, I had a corporate career, first as account manager, then as a finance and strategy manager for the pan-European sales department. And then more and more, there was this, nudge inside of me as remembering that bachelor thesis in my university, starting having the kids, and with the kids, that nudge grew stronger and stronger when I felt, okay, I want to actually have a career that focuses on impact. With the birth of my son, it became really apparent that I want to do it, but I was still doubting. With the birth of my daughter, the urgency really sped up, because I also finished my degree at the same time on energy and climate, and I realized how little time we have and how much action needs to be done. And yeah, that's when I started doing a lot. Okay, I know you work in recruitment, but I was back then in my old ways thinking I need to look for jobs and send CVs. And sustainability jobs were very rare. In Belgium, I could find...
What year was this?
Well, to be honest, throughout my years at Mastercard, I was slowly looking. I guess that's okay to say that now. But I even 10 years ago, I was starting to look. And back then I could find 5 jobs a year in Belgium or something like this. And I started slowly filling out CVs, and nobody ever responded back to me. I'm not ashamed to say that. It was always automatic responses in half an hour, thank you for your application. What am I doing wrong, And I knew I was really, really capable and passionate about it. So I thought, okay, first I don't have an experience, I need to get a degree. So I got a degree, and I tried again, and it didn't work either. Plus, I was already quite far in my corporate career, so I couldn't go on junior roles, having a house loan, having little kids, it wasn't an option. And that's when I started transitioning in my career and outside of my career into sustainability. Happy to dive in with more concrete questions.
Sure. Because I think this is the key thing, and one of the reasons why I was keen to talk to you, and we'll come on to how I came across you. But when we started talking and understanding this transition is probably one of the things that we at GS2 get spoken to about the most from individuals who are in a completely separate corporate career. Perhaps sustainability is not something that they feel that they can have any influence over in their organization, but they want to do more. But not knowing where to start or how to do that is so difficult for them. And I think your approach to how you did it is one that should be spoken about and shared for ideas. So perhaps you could talk about how you approach this, how strategically you approach this, and knowing what the end goal was. So could you share a bit more, please?
Oh, definitely. First of all, I think there are different stages of people wanting to switch career. There is that stage where you think, I really want it, but I have some time. It's not urgent. And at that stage, at least I was kind of looking, filling out some applications, not getting any results, but still being okay with where I was. And then at some point, all of us arrive into a stage where staying where you are is more painful than moving on. And for me, that was in no way related to Mastercard. I love the company and the people I was working with, but I couldn't find a 100% dedicated sustainability role. And that was the reason I was like, okay, I really have to do something. My home is melting. I have 2 little kids. It has to be now. And that's at that stage when you feel like, okay, you have to move on. Staying is worse. And your heart is just screaming at you, you've got to do something. And I think that's when all of us start getting creative, and I started getting creative. I remember at some point we had an executive talk from Anne Kearns at Mastercard, and she said that every time she wanted a new role, she created it. She kind of went out to people, said what she wanted to do, and she got it. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. You don't have to wait for opportunities. You can actually create them. And that kind of stuck with me. And I started doing everything that I could. So I started posting on LinkedIn about sustainability and my knowledge, because I figured, okay, my experience is not really related, but people need to know that I'm passionate and I know things because I have a degree and I'm, that's my thing. I started posting. I started reaching out to at least 50 people in sustainability every day, sending them a message, connecting, and they were responding that they'd love to jump on calls. So I started getting to know people. I launched a podcast where I started interviewing these people as well about their career. I went outside of my job and I started volunteering for a local environmental council in the commune and local natural organization to kind of feel what I'd like to do, to learn how that works locally. And then maybe most importantly, I started reaching out to a lot of people within Mastercard on how I can support their projects. So there were existing projects already. I plugged them in. I said, let me help you drive that project in this region. I started reaching out to other teams and saying, okay, tell me what you do in sustainability. I'd love to support you. How can I support you outside of my role? And I'm here to give you resources. And then I also had a couple of really, really great executives that were backing me up, knowing about my passion, and they connected me with other executives. And this way I also ended up as a co-project manager on a European project to see where the future of products and services at Mastercard can take it in terms of sustainability. So I started leading a lot of things in parallel. Another executive, which was the manager, the boss of my boss, he was like, I see your passion. Why don't you become sustainability lead for our whole department in Europe? I'm like, that would be great. Thank you so much. So I started doing a lot on top of my job about something that I was passionate about. I started speaking about it and people started noticing. You know, at the beginning I was talking about it and they weren't listening because I was talking in a way like, we have to do something, it's urgent. And they were like, yeah, okay. But as they saw my passion shine through and we started to tell stories and things I was passionate about, they started listening and they were like, oh yeah, we have to do something. Tell me what to do. I'll do anything. And kind of the momentum started growing both within the company to get experience, to get plugged into different projects, to connect with different teams and help them, but also outside of the company in terms of volunteering, in terms of meeting people on LinkedIn, in terms of being open to new opportunities. And that took some time. It took some time to find something new, but eventually it happened.
Sure. So just to, I suppose, get a bit more practical with what you were describing. So those things, the volunteering, the social impact projects, the proactive reaching out to people on LinkedIn, posting on LinkedIn, podcast, these are happening, I suppose, outside of your day job. But the work internally within Mastercard, the sustainability projects that you were getting involved in and leading, was that still outside of your day job, or were you able to carve time out where you could do that? And if so, how did you get that time signed off, or how did that work?
Well, the management really saw my passion. So, as long as the other job was done, they were open to me engaging in other initiatives. So I cannot say that it was like strictly, 80-20 or 100 plus 20. It was like, if you're passionate about it, do it. Get involved. As long as your other things are being done, there is no problem with doing extra things, because they knew I wanted to transition and they were incredibly kind and supportive to give me space, to take time to gain experience and to do that transition. And I think that really has to do with like great talent management in terms of management within the company and understanding where the hearts of people lie, and making sure that you give them space to kind of progress into that area.
For sure.
So it lays down to good conversation and being open about what you want to do.
Because I could see from the cynical side, others that are in organizations where it might be slightly more dictatorial, that they would say, well, I could never do it as part, in my role time because people wouldn't let me, or and I understand that there are organizations like that, but I suppose what you're saying is it's a more proactive approach to create it rather than expect it to be given to you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, nobody can guess what you want. You have to create it. And I learned it the hard way because it took me a long time to transition. In the end, 11 years. But if you don't tell people, if you don't show it, they won't know. And being back at that time, what I learned is that any role can be a sustainability role. Even if you kind of not given time outside of your role to do something and support other projects, see what kind of initiatives you can pick up to make your role a sustainability role. Because in the end, that's how the career space will transition. IT will become sustainable IT, procurement will become sustainable procurement, finance will become sustainable finance. I mean, you are recruiting for different roles, right? But for people that are passionate about sustainability, that's exactly it. We can be stuck in a corner, but then if you're really stuck and management is not supportive, see what kind of things you can do within your role to turn that role more into a sustainability direction.
Yes, for sure. And that's absolutely the direction that we've gone as an organization in terms of our recruitment. When I first set the business up, it was very much we place sustainability leaders into corporates, but you realize pretty quickly that the sustainability function in most organizations is very small, because by nature it has to be embedded, it has to be owned by the business, and integrated together. So we've transitioned to work more now with sustainably conscious organizations overall, but to help them find leaders across multiple of functions, but all that have that fundamental belief in sustainability. And if you work within an organization like that and you have this passion, then it's the easiest thing to do, because you can have your career that maybe you studied for and that you're very proud of, but those projects you're leading will always have a sustainable angle, or at least you can talk about them. So I think that's where it's about finding the right organization as well as the right job, because if you're in the right organization, you might be able to find the job there that doesn't exist yet. The second thing I want to pick up on that you said, which I think is something that's extremely undervalued, particularly for those who I would say are very passionate about sustainability, but perhaps aren't able to articulate it in the right way. You said at the beginning that maybe when you were making your messaging, it wasn't landing because it was coming from a place that maybe they didn't understand. How did you start to understand that you needed to reposition perhaps what you were saying and the stories that you would tell? Could you perhaps give an example of where that really, you've really understood that and started to change the way you communicated?
Yes, let's do that. So I was trying to communicate the importance of sustainability to executives. And as I said at the beginning, I went from the place of statistics. Like, we need to do something. We have, 10 years left. We have 7 years left. Emissions are rising, but it wasn't landing home. And then at some point, I was asked to do an internal call for the whole, pan-European team to talk about sustainability, invite other speakers, and kind of talk about the projects. And I thought, well, what if I take a different angle? What if I don't just talk about numbers and statistics and how important it is, but what if I share some stories that I'm really fascinated by? And I drafted the whole outline, first starting with those stories. So I talked about new developments in carbon capture and storage and plants that were being built. I talked about the UN patron of the oceans, Louis Pugh, who does swims in the North Pole, in Antarctica and Greenland to highlight the urgency of melting Arctic. And I talked about the fascination I have about Greenland and how Greenland water melts and then how it, doesn't mix and what it means for this sea level rise. But not just sea level rise. I knew that quite some managers wanted to retire and live in Miami. And I said, well, if you're planning to live in Miami, at least buy an apartment on the 5th floor. And, I tried, based on the knowledge that I have of them, to kind of connect those stories to something really more personal. I shared a few stories like that with, a lot of passion because I was passionate about them and I found them fascinating. Then I invited, a couple of other people to share about the initiatives that we were doing at Mastercard around sustainability. And then I started diving into more concretely what our department can do. And I called a few people to share what we are already doing with customers and what are the kind of exciting things that are happening on the ground with concrete examples. And after that, people reached out and they said, whoa, that was the best, internal meeting that we had in a long time. I'm so sold. Like, tell me what to do. We're going to do it. And I thought, that's interesting. So stories apparently work. And that's the approach I've been taking since then. And only later on this year, actually, I learned that stories stick 20 times more in our brain than the statistics does. And that's something that I have witnessed in action. So since then, my approach was go with the stories that you're passionate about and share those stories and try to connect those stories to other people and what they are passionate about, like, Miami and living in Miami. And then people will follow because they will see that drive behind you and they will see how that also involves them personally.
For sure. Absolutely. Well, talking about stories and creating, I suppose, content that people really buy into, how I came across you was your What's New in Sustainability this week in 1 minute, I think it was. Was it 1 minute?
Yeah.
So where did that idea come from, and how did that how did you get there from first posting on LinkedIn, or was that the first thing you posted on LinkedIn? Like, tell me about that journey.
The former editor in chief of Wired used to post on LinkedIn what's new in tech in 1 minute every day. I think he posted updates every day. And I thought, well, that's interesting. What if we use the same concept and we do that with sustainability? So that's where the idea came from cross-pollinating and stealing shamelessly.
Yeah.
It wasn't the first thing that I posted. Actually, when I started posting, I subscribed to a few sustainability influencers back then on LinkedIn. I saw what they post, and I saw that sometimes it's just simple news article with a few lines from that newspaper. And so I started small, something like this. And then when I've gained some traction, I thought, okay, it's time to create those 1 minute in sustainability videos. And at the beginning, I just focused on what's new in sustainability in 1 minute. And I did it for quite a while. I think for a year, I did it that way, where every week I would book a time in my calendar. Throughout the week, I would screen the news, see also what people on LinkedIn post about. I'll select like 3 or 4 news, and I'm going to summarize that in a minute. It seems like a very quick thing to do, but it would take me like at least 3 hours,
I'm sure.
with everything getting dressed up, putting down the text, reviewing the articles, makeup, video. I think 20 takes.
Were you videoing from? Were you just doing like a selfie video on your phone, or did you have like how did you do it?
Selfie video on my phone, and after a while I had a light as well to make it look a little bit better, but it was just a selfie video on my phone and like a auto captions up to add the subtitles. That was it, and 20 takes, to make sure everything looks good. And then some people said, well, what can I suggest the structure? Why don't you focus on both the good and the bad news separately? So I thought I'm going to focus on that separately. And then I'm actually going to finish with the good news. And that was an advice I got on LinkedIn. And then I started doing that, actually, first bad news, then the good news. And I think in total, I've been doing it for like 1.5 years or almost 2 years. I was recording those news, and it really picked up, and a lot of people were saying that on Friday morning, the first thing they did on LinkedIn was, find my 1 minute. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, for sure. And I suppose it's, but this is the part about, sustainability and telling the story or creating the message. It's things that people look forward to, that's positive, that can actually be the thing that creates change. There is so much negative news about sustainability that I think what I really liked about it was always that positive uptone. As you say, even if you were sharing some negative things at the end, you were always finishing positively. And I remember watching that and starting to watch it more regularly and thinking, we have to talk. So we are finally here, which is great. But moving on from Mastercard then, because I suppose what I've learned is how you've positioned yourself to make this change, the work that you've done, that inside and outside of your career to get ready to this point of moving on from Mastercard. But it was still quite a bold decision to resign. You'd worked all your way up, you'd become a director. But tell me about like how that happened, because I appreciate that it didn't quite go to plan of how you thought it would, and maybe what you learned in that situation.
Well, first, actually, you don't see that on my LinkedIn, but first, I found another job as a sustainability consultant after Mastercard for the insurance sector, and I started working there. And I think after 3 or 4 months, we realized it wasn't a fit, neither for them nor for me. And I was like, I don't want to be a sustainability consultant. It's just something that doesn't drive me. So that's where it didn't go to plan. So after Mastercard, the next day I started there, but then after 4 months there, I resigned. However, it was all, and that was quite scary. Of course, because to make a transition, I used quite some savings, not just in the period afterwards. However, when I was still back at Mastercard, I was already talking to a lot of people, and at some point I received a message from an entrepreneur called Frederik Verstraeten, and he was telling me about all the exciting projects he was doing. Belgium was back then on a radar because there was a big scandal around forever chemicals, and they went around, measured people's blood, noticed that the concentrations went 10 to 100 times above the suggested limit, and Belgian government obliged 3M back then as a producer and the polluter to find a solution. But there were no solutions, and Frederik found one. So he contacted me, he said, look, I found a business model for soil cleanup and restoration. This is what I'm doing. Let's talk. And initially he thought that maybe Mastercard could be interested. And I was like, okay, look, I love what you're doing. I have no idea how to tie that up to Mastercard business and what Mastercard does, and typically companies doing sustainability is related to their business. But I really want to talk more. And we started talking. He told me about the cleanup of forever chemicals from soils that he did together with a postdoc from the university, how he did it with plants, how it really worked, the materials he created from clean plant parts. And I was like, whoa, that's amazing. And then I remember I was at a conference in Amsterdam where I heard Bojan Slat, the founder of the Ocean Cleanup, speak on stage. And I've been a fan of Bojan for a long time. And I came back to Frederick and I said, Frederick, if we can clean one of the most contaminated countries in the world, we have to help clean the world. We have to create like the next ocean cleanup, but for soils. And he was like, okay. And back then he found a partner and an investor to kind of create the company in Belgium and to start hyperscaling these bio-based construction materials and also soil restoration. And we presented the idea of not just doing that in Belgium, but kind of creating a nature tag that would help speed up and replicate the process with partners in other countries around the world. And I said, let's do it. And that's how it all started. So there was a period of uncertainty of a few months between when I quit and when I didn't know what to do. My mom was completely freaking out, to be honest. She was like, you shouldn't leave, I'm like, but mom, it's just, it's not the right fit, like I can't do it. And yeah, the only thing that kept me going back then is that when I heard about that pilot of Frederick, and that when that idea came to me that we have to hyperscale that globally, I knew deep in my heart that that's the only thing I wanted to do. Like I had such a deep feeling in me that that's it. And that if that idea came to me, I have to be responsible for executing it, that I had no doubts that that's the path forward. And I still have no doubts that that's the path forward. And, working in a startup environment and driving something like this, it's incredibly challenging. But I'm still at that place where I feel like I don't want to do anything else. That's the right thing to do. And that kind of kept me going throughout all those months of doubts when I had to go into my savings and when I didn't know what would be next.
Sure. And I think the one of the key takeaways from me with this is that work you were doing whilst at Mastercard in building your network and building your brand and building your community then is how this opportunity came to be. If you hadn't been doing that, no matter how passionate you would have been and how much of a good fit this would be for you, you wouldn't have connected. And we talk to people a lot about this, that, being well networked and focusing on that as a percentage of your time, of your working time is so crucial, because you never know when those opportunities come. And as recruiters, we know mainly the best things happen from people that we are connected with, we're in network with, rather than someone who's never heard of us before. So it's just natural. So I think it's just a great way and to show that story back from Mastercard of this work you were doing then, which has led to this now, which is so good. So obviously the mission is. Can
I just add something?
Sure.
on that before, because I thought that you picked up on it really, really wisely. When I was first in the beginning of my career, I thought if you do your job really, really well above expectations, you're going to progress. And that worked because I got a promotion every year. But then at some point I really stalled for 6 years. Okay, I had kids in the meantime, but I really stalled. And I thought something is wrong. I'm like busting my ass off, but it's not working out. And that's when I learned that connections and networking is really important. And then another thing that I learned was you can be the best cleaning lady, but nobody will hire you if nobody knows about you. And that's kind of what you described about networking, getting to know people, and also finding a way that you're comfortable with, because I used to dread networking at events, but online and LinkedIn, and especially the pandemic, opened all kinds of opportunities that you started reaching out to people, and all of a sudden they were willing to jump on a call with you. There are so many ways to do that for like introverted people like me, for example. It's just a matter of finding the right way of doing it that works for you so that you can find it enjoyable. But it's absolutely critical. Now, even in our work, I notice that our best partnerships, they come from networking. And Frederick finds partners through Paddle because he plays Paddle a lot, and I find partners through LinkedIn. Everybody has their way of doing that, but everything comes down to connections and networking.
For sure, yeah. You should put that on your pitch deck. Paddle and LinkedIn, the power of paddle and LinkedIn to grow the network. but it's true, and I pale in insignificance to you. I think I was looking the other day, and it was something like 65 or 70,000 followers now you have on LinkedIn. But that's such a powerful thing that you have so many, and we in my company we try to focus on that. It's an element of our personal branding that we focus on to ensure more people know about us, and it's a crucial part of the way of working now. And I think particularly if sustainability individuals want to transition into mainstream, or mainstream people want to transition into sustainability, you have to have some sort of personal brand to help you on that journey.
Absolutely, because I learned that the hard way. The moment I stopped being at Mastercard, I learned that Elena from Mastercard was much more interesting to people than just Elena.
Yeah.
And I was like, I never want to be in that situation again. I really don't. I want people to know me for me and for the things I'm doing, and not be tied up. Of course, Mastercard is a huge global brand. I'll never outshine it. But I didn't want to be dependent on the brand behind me and all of a sudden become non-interesting to people. That was a revelation, eye-opening revelation for me.
Yes, yeah, and it's the same with a lot of people we talk to at very senior levels, but they are tied, their identity almost is tied to the company they work for rather than their own individual approach. So focusing on Earth Plus, of course, it's a huge purpose-driven mission that you have here, but it's not just the Forever Chemicals work that you do. You also do some other areas. Could you explain a bit more about the organization, perhaps the kind of the business model, or how it works, and where you are in the journey so far?
Yes. So what we do is we work on lands. There are 3 types of lands that we work on. That's polluted land, forever chemicals, or other types of pollution. That's degraded agricultural land, and it might seem that we don't have a lot, but actually 52% of agricultural lands globally are degraded. In Europe, that's 60-70%. So basically where farmers are growing food every year, they see lower yields, and that's also the lands we're working on. And then the third type of land is deserted land, so closer to real degradation and becoming closer to deserts. The idea of what we are doing is helping to clean and restore those lands with the power of plants and other nature-based solutions. So let's take an example of forever chemicals. We use plants like industrial hemp to suck out pollution from soil. We use trees like willow trees to suck out pollution from the groundwater because they communicate with each other. And like we utilize the power of fungi in the soil. It all depends on contamination of the state of the soil, and depends on the location and the geographic region, but we select with our scientists the best combination of solutions. In that solution mix, there is always somewhere industrial hemp, for the reason that through industrial hemp, we can create a business model for soil restoration, that it will not be just a cost, but we can actually use clean plant parts of industrial hemp to create materials. And hemp is great for restoring soils, both pollution, but also biodiversity, and help farmers increase yields. But it's also an amazing fiber. It's one of the strongest fibers in the world. So you can make lots of materials out of it. And actually, our countries used to be full of hemp. Hemp was the sails of the ships that crossed the oceans. Our clothes used to be from hemp, fishing nets. Ford made his first car of hemp biocomposite running on hemp fuel. So it used to be the crop we relied upon a lot. It grows really fast, 4 meters to 4 months. One of the strongest fibers, so we specifically focus on construction materials because construction is a huge carbon emitter, 40% of global emissions. And our goal is to turn construction from a huge carbon emitter into a huge carbon sink, where we take plants like industrial hemp, we turn them into circular materials, and we keep that carbon stored in the buildings for at least 100 years. So that's how we build it. Mm-hmm.
So what are what would be the construction materials that you actually create from the hemp? Where would it go in that process?
That's a great question. There are a few options. One of them is a wood substitute called reinforced hemp wood. This way you don't need to cut trees. You can save up to 1,000 trees per hectare per year. Because imagine a tree grows in 15, 20 years, hemp grows in 3-4 months, and then you cut it. It's like a one-time crop. So you have a lot of biomass, and because it's so strong, you can create wood substitutes. So that's one of them. It's also fully circular, so at the end of life, you can chop it and make exactly the same wood. Another one is insulation, and we do 2 types of insulation, one just with hemp and with our partner with other nature-based plants. And then another type of insulation is hemp and mycelium, which is mushrooms basically. So this way we can substitute fossil fuels, because now our buildings are insulated with fossil fuel-based insulation. And with retrofitting wave, it's huge. We try to cut down energy costs, but we're using a lot of fossil fuels to insulate homes. Now, this way we can move to natural materials. And then another material that we are making is a biocomposite, which is a plastic substitute. So imagine, once again, we have normally fossil fuels that we turned into plastics. Now we can make biocomposites fully plant-based. And this way we don't use fossil fuels, but we use natural solutions and plants like industrial hemp to make it. And the idea to make it, a no-brainer, to make these materials as simple to implement, certified, very close in price point to traditional materials, so that we can turn construction in that carbon sink and actually make sure that construction does good. And you grow materials locally, you don't need to transport them. You put those materials in buildings, and then you can still claim carbon credits on top of it, because you're literally sticking carbon into buildings. And we thought it would be such a cool regenerative model where you regenerate soils and you make construction better at the same time.
For sure. And I suppose also integrating those circular principles into those projects is something that stood out when you were telling me about this before. What are some of the successes that you've seen from that? And do you have any, further goals around circular principles that you're trying to embed?
So the idea of the circular principles that we're embedding is that, first of all, we extend the lifetime of material as much as possible. But let's say it's a warehouse. And one of the elements we're working on is a sandwich panel. So sandwich panel is like a modular element in buildings. And traditional one is often made from wood on the outside and fossil fuel-based insulation on the inside. We make it with hemp wood on the outside and hemp and mycelium-based insulation on the inside. It comes in the modular blocks so that you can kind of easily put them in buildings. It's modular, so at the end of life of the building, let's say warehouse has to go down, you can take out that panel and you can put it in a new building. But let's say if it's damaged, you can still take it apart, you can chop hemp wood and make exactly the same wood, and you can also recycle this mycelium insulation into new mycelium insulation. It's the same way with biocomposites. We design them in a way that you can chop them and make the same biocomposite afterwards. That's kind of a design principle that we took into account, because you always have a decision to make. You can go fully bio-based and natural, 100%, but then the product might be not good enough. Or you can go 97% natural and bio-based, but then you can do it circular and keep the product much longer. And that's we are still looking for 100% nature-based alternatives, but at the moment we took circularity as the most important decision, because the quality of the material is important and the length of life. Now we're also building a technology platform together with Microsoft and Delaware to trace everything from field into the final products and the buildings where these materials are in, so that later on we know where that is. And Europe is also working on the digital passports and circularity for buildings, so that later on we know where those materials are and where we can repurpose it. So the goal here is to also add a bit of producer responsibility concept, where you're not just, dumping a product on the customer, but you actually take responsibility at the end of life to take that product and repurpose it into a new product.
I see, understood. And so are you liaising directly with the customer, or do you have like service organizations that do this for you? Or like, what's the actual model of Earth Plus and what you do versus what you have suppliers or your other connections? How does it all work?
So because it's a very holistic model, you have the fields, you have the final products and everything in between. We're actually a group of companies working together. So we have a company focusing on phytoremediation and soil restoration. We have a company that is focusing on material design. and finding the partnerships for the production of materials. It's also a mother company of the whole group called C-Biotech. And we have Earth Plus, which is a technology platform that traces all the physical projects, applies for certification of carbon credits with certified bodies, and it kind of brings new instruments, ESG reporting, carbon credits, but also land restoration investments, and also helps replicate the model in other markets through local partners. So basically, let's say it's not a very straightforward plug and play model, but on the other hand, that's the only way you can make it work. You can make it work only when you have those radical collaboration line. And in each line of business, we have partners that are supporting us. So, for example, for soil restoration part, that's certifying bodies and, that work on soil tests and other things. On the material creation part, it's different partners that help make the materials, because what we do is we prefer not to invest in new factories. There's no sense in doing that. The best way is to repurpose old factories or find collaborations where you already have the necessary equipment to produce a material, where you can easily plug it into the production line. So we have partners that help produce materials, but we also have partners that take the materials and put it in their buildings, like offtake agreements. And then for Earth Plus, it's Microsoft and Delaware as partners that help to provide technology, that help design the platform. And then there are partners with whom we are certifying carbon credits, finding new land projects around the world. So it's not like I can explain you in one thing, this is the business model. It's all about radical collaboration and figuring out things together. Because I think for too long, we've been thinking that simple scales. And that's why we've been looking at everything in isolated way. Let's say how we arrived with Ferrari Chemicals. We needed a non-stick water resistant product. So we created that product. And that's great, but we haven't thought about any consequences that will have on our health or on wildlife and nature, and that it will literally be there forever. So we need to start a new way of thinking, where we're thinking holistic like nature does, and where we're plugging in different partners at the right stages for this radical collaboration piece. Because there is no way we can solve climate and nature crisis alone. We have to do that in partnership. And in our case, if we just focus on agriculture, farmers can grow hemp, let's say, but they will never find an offtake for it, so it will not pick up. Construction companies can decide they go bio-based, but if they don't collaborate with farmers as rotation crops, and here I'm not talking about completely overtaking food production. The ideal scenario is rotation crops, so you restore soil and then farmers have better main yields on their main crop. But if you don't bring these two together, none of the business models work.
Sure.
And for me, that's the new normal. And this way we are starting to learn from nature and all the interdependencies that nature has. We're starting to kind of replicate those models in our business world. And that's really important, this radical collaboration piece.
And my last question then on Earth Plus is, if you, in terms of your goals, targets over the next 3, 5, 10 years, what are some of the big goals that you have or landmarks you're trying to achieve?
Well, let's say from the short-term goals is the launch of our platform, which is scheduled for the second quarter, beginning of second quarter next year. And that's a very big milestone. The second one is we have kind of a hub in Belgium, but now we're starting large restoration project together with a local farmer in Spain, regenerative farmer, to bring the river back and to restore those lands. So creating a Spanish hub will be a really big milestone. And then the third milestone is creating the US hub, because there it's also a lot about contamination. It's coming into the surface, and we want to create hub there as well. These are like a near-term targets, but the big mission is to create the largest soil and CO2 cleanup with nature and nature-based solutions, and to make nature sexy again. And I think we have a lot of work to do there.
Yeah.
The moment we have cleaned and restored soils, 90% of our soils are going to be degraded by 2050 if we don't do anything. So we will find ourselves successful if we reverse the trend. We can actually help restore soils, and eventually, like the ocean cleanup says, they want to be out of business because there is no plastic to clean. Eventually, it would be lovely to have all the soils restored and to have no pollution in the soils, but it's going to take us a very, very long time to get there.
For sure, understood. Moving away, I suppose, but from Earth Plus, but more broadly into the industry. There's a few things that you've mentioned previously and online as well that I've seen that I wanted to just tackle before we finish. You've spoken about how sustainable business transitions need to happen, and also how that needs to be done through education around sustainability, and I suppose back to the storytelling and other areas. But I can see that a lot of the work that you had been doing fairly recently was around educational initiatives with governments and ministers, and interviewing them and understanding what's going on with some spotlights. Could you share more about that and how that plays a part in the world of education?
It's the season of elections. So for us, it was important to contact different political leaders and political parties and understand their agenda on sustainability, because political decisions often drive businesses and sustainability decisions. Because, for example, if you look at the construction sector, currently fossil fuel-based insulation is subsidized, but nature-based insulation isn't. So it should be the other way around. Like, we shouldn't finance something that finances our destruction, right? And regulation often plays a big piece. So that's why kind of connecting with politicians, seeing what's their agenda, and also explaining to them the urgency of things. I mean, they don't know everything in this world, right? They also need kind of support to understand what the priorities could be, what the situations are. That was and still is an important part for us. We are not waiting for politicians to introduce new initiatives. We are kind of showing that it can work through regenerative business models. But definitely to have political support is very important. And I'm dreaming of the day where our global politicians get on board of the global climate action, and we are not anymore a world of isolated countries that are fighting for resources, but the world of countries that are working together to solve what really matters.
How do you find the level of interest from these ministers and politicians in the conversations that you have? And I assume the ones who don't make it to conversation, who maybe don't engage so much. What's the level of interest, if you would sort of put a barometer on it?
Well, they say we are doing the right thing. So that's quite encouraging. We also did sign a charter of collaboration for the future of our children with the Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo. So, I mean, overall, it's positive. And they really like the developments and innovation. And especially they really like that we're able to make a regenerative business out of it. That is not just money that goes and you need to fit it more money. It's the kind of a regeneration piece where the more you regenerate, the more money you have to regenerate further. So they really love the innovation part that comes out of it, and they want to support that innovative piece. But I think to really get a lot of politicians and ministers on board globally in a lot of different countries, it's still a lot of work that all of us in the sustainability space will need to do.
For sure. And you mentioned that, policy and regulation can drive business change, which of course it does. But I find with most of the commercial business leaders I talk to who are doing great things, they're doing it because they want to, or they can see why they should do it rather than waiting for the regulation.
Exactly.
It is a way that both I suppose that both happen. From a business perspective, do you engage or do you interact with businesses on this as well, or do you focus purely on kind of government and ministerial routes?
We mainly focus on the businesses. So we mainly have business partners. And indeed, we see that a lot of companies want to transition. They want to do the right thing. They want to make it work. And these are the type of partners that we collaborate with. So no, we mainly focus on the business part of things and making things work and, fostering that radical collaboration for action.
Sure. Okay. I put together some quick fire questions that hopefully we can just finish with to get an understanding of. One last question. One last one though before we go to that, because I'm not sure it will be a quick fire answer, but is you mentioned there around the subsidies for the fossil fuel based construction products rather than the natural ones. But what would you say are some of the biggest, maybe the top 2 or 3 biggest policy changes that you think that could make the biggest impact if you were elected and able to make these policy changes?
Well, look, what an interesting question. It's almost a Pandora box, right? I'm going to focus on the ones that are very close to what we are doing because they're top of mind for me. So first one is indeed subsidies for bio-based, nature-based materials. That's important. The second one is more strict regulation on chemicals and pollution, because I'm talking about soil pollution as a distant thing, but actually it's not. Soil have the same organisms and bacteria as we do, because we eat food from soils and 95% of our food comes from soils. So when soils are polluted, that means that pollution is in our food. And I dig a lot into numbers in our line of work. And when I go to supermarket, I see statistics. I don't see any more food. I'm like, what is the chance that that is contaminated and not good? And I think that's not okay. We need to have healthy food and we need to have healthy soils. So what is really important is the regulation on chemicals, because it's one thing for us to clean it, which is incredibly hard. Even though nature-based solutions are amazing, it will take years and decades to do it on a global level. But we need to close the tap first, that there is no leak of those chemicals. Like, for example, there was research that if you continue at current production of forever chemicals, it will take more than a global GDP to clean it. I mean, that's not okay. So for me, regulation needs to be more strict on that, and we need to feel protected by our regulators in our everyday life, right? We cannot be surrounded by things that are toxic and poisonous, and also especially the ones in our food. As a mother, I think it's not okay. We have a right to healthy soils and healthy food, and it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be like that. So for me, that's the second one that is really important. And the third regulatory piece that I think could really help is more stimulation for nature-based solutions and nature-based investments, because we tend to rely a lot on engineering and technology, which is good, okay, but nature removes majority of our CO2 emissions. Nature has incredible innovations, and it seems like we kind of push nature aside towards economic development. But in the end, we are nature, and actually by killing off nature, we're killing ourselves. So I would love to see policymakers and governments focus more on nature-based solutions and pushing that forward, both innovations and restoration piece, because based on that, they can ensure we are adapting to climate easily. Based on that, they can ensure we have supply of water. Based on that, they can ensure, we have done such drastic differences in dry soils, because we have a natural buffer. So they can actually take care of the citizens in a way by nurturing nature, and nature being a buffer and taking care of us. And that's a really important third regulatory piece.
Absolutely. So on to the quickfire questions then. What's one small daily habit that you practice to reduce your environmental footprint?
That's a good one. I as of last week, I switched from tea paper bags to whole leaf tea. Maybe not just for the reason of waste, but also because the more, once again, I learn, the more I understand that tea bags are not exactly healthy of the, tea bag material. So let's say there is a egoistic, selfish part in it, but also a bit of less waste. So now I drink
and
whole
they
leaf
taste
tea.
and they taste better. I drink loose leaf tea, and it's much better. So yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Yes.
What your who is your favourite or personal hero in the sustainability field?
Lewis Pugh, 100%. I mean, that guy swims in Speedos in 0-degree places to showcase that there is water there instead of ice. And then he goes to politicians to advocate for protection of our oceans. I always knew I wanted to be like Lewis Pugh, even though I knew I wouldn't swim in those environments, but I wanted to have the same global ambition. Yeah. I want to have the same global ambition as the guy does. He's an absolute hero.
Sure. But less Speedos in cold water, I suppose.
Well, that's the idea. That's his idea. If he would swim not in Speedos, but in a hydro costume, nobody would pay attention.
Yeah, exactly. What's your one tip for making travel more sustainable?
To explore new places, to not just go to the most crowded tourist destinations, but to explore new places nearby, hidden gems, where there are no crowds and maybe where you don't have to take a plane.
Sure. What's one book on sustainability that you think everybody should read?
I'm going to give you a non-sustainability book, but it's not directly related to recruitment, but basically it's a book that kind of turned my life. It was also from that event in Amsterdam. It's written by Dr. Christian Busch, and it's called Connecting the Dots, The Art and Science of Creating Good Luck. And that book, when I read it, I realized I already do a lot of things like that through LinkedIn, but it helps in terms of career transition or anything you're trying to do to kind of create those serendipitous moments, and shows that it's not just luck, but you can work for it. And there was a very important line in that book that said every societal change starts with individuals. So before I read that, I felt quite powerless. But then I read that one and I thought, actually, I can make a difference.
For sure. What's a green or clean technology you most excited about right now?
Earth Plus and what we're doing.
Good answer.
I am very biased here.
And if there was one big sustainability goal that you would like or hope to see achieved in the next decade, what would it be?
Nature regeneration. I want us to turn the tide, and I want to see regeneration projects everywhere.
Excellent. So you've already given so many great pieces of wisdom here. My last question, I suppose, from what we talk about here and leaving the world better than we found it, is for your own legacy. And I can tell from the way that you articulate things, how thoughtful you've been in your career, that this is something that you're probably thinking about fairly often. But what do you think that by the end of your career you would like your legacy to be, to know that you've left the world better than you found it?
When I left Mastercard, I was really thinking I want to be on the cover of global magazines for the work that we would do. Now I don't really care about that, but what I want is at the end of my career to see that regeneration and projects everywhere, and to know that the food that we are eating, all of us are eating, is healthy. For me, that's most important, that I leave my kids and their kids, in a much better state in terms of regeneration and food than we are in now.
Excellent. Well, I have no doubt that you will be successful in your journey. It doesn't just take one person, but it does take individuals to change the tide. And I think what you're doing, how you're shining a spotlight on it, the way you're creating the narrative in the industry is fantastic. And I am absolutely with you on the journey, and to help you in any way that we can. You are, of course, extremely busy, and I know you have lots of requests for different things, but if people have listened to this and they love what you have to say and would like to connect with you or engage in some way, what would be the best way for them to reach out or to try to get some time with you?
LinkedIn. That's the best way to reach out. That's my go-to social media. So rather than sending an email, LinkedIn is always the case.
For sure. Excellent. Well, look, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great to spend an hour with you. I feel very privileged to have that time, and I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. And let's stay in touch to see how things continue with Earth Plus, and we wish you all the best on the journey.
Thank you so much, Josh. It was a privilege to speak with you today, and it was really fun, and lots of success with all the work that you're doing with helping passionate people find passionate jobs with impact.
Thank you so much. Speak soon.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Better Than We Found It. I hope you have found value from this to support your own purpose-led journey. This episode was brought to you by GS2 Partnership, my organisation focused on providing talent solutions for sustainably focused organisations. We are driven by our purpose of connecting the people who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. If you are looking for a partner to support you with your hiring plans, or you are looking for your own career next steps, please reach out to us or personally drop me a message on LinkedIn. It's great to hear from listeners to the podcast, and I would welcome the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for our next episode.